majority of what we were doing is really managing care for families at a concierge level that are struggling with mental health and substance abuse issues. When you go to McDonald's and get a job, no one's giving you an award for being clean and sober. I got to get into life and figure out where do I go from here. I couldn't think of any better way to put what was a really daunting, scary life of uncertainty. Couldn't find a better way to put it to use than to try to help somebody else turn the corner.
Living the way we live now it's a miracle and it's a gift and it's the greatest thing ever. In so many of these cases, just that definition of insanity that we all hear in recovery, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Hello, I am B. Reeves with New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly podcast, Finding New Waters. Our goal in creating Finding New Waters is to provide a resource for families to help navigate the complexities of supporting a loved one struggling with substance use or mental health. When we find ourselves in crisis due to one of these issues, most people have no idea where to turn. We hope to shed some light onto what is often the darkest hour for many families. Thank you. All right. Welcome to another episode of Finding New Waters. I'm sitting here with New Waters CEO Justin McClendon, and our special guest today is Ryan Gartrell of Spearhead Health. I met Ryan out in Tucson a few years ago, and he was living in LA, and we had some Greensboro/North Carolina connections to talk about. And then he's since moved back. And welcome, Ryan. I would love to hear about, just tell us what you do.
Sure. First, I think I'll say I appreciate you guys having me on here.
Likewise.
What I do or what we do, I'll do my best to put it into a few words or just be concise about it. But I would say majority of what we were doing is really managing care for families at a concierge level that are struggling with mental health and substance abuse issues. And the services that we provide, I would say you could generally, in a lot of ways, classify them more as adjunct services to what would traditionally be considered as solutions for people that are struggling with addiction or mental health issues. And so that may look like, as you've experienced, you maybe need to get somebody from point A to point B safely. So we provide safe transportation, or a family may have a young 18-year-old kid they don't know what to do with. They've come home from a break and realize that they're struggling, or they get a call from the school and don't exactly know what's going on. And we would come in and start to interview family members and potentially friends or any outside providers. Ultimately come up with a plan. It could look like some form of sit-down family meeting that you may call an intervention. I'd say we prefer to try to change the language around that, because I tend to believe that there's like this fear and anxiety and at times a negative connotation, where we really like to see it more as an opportunity for everybody to step into change. But by and large, most of our time is spent on coaching and case management for families and individuals struggling with mental health and substance abuse issues.
Cool.
We do some, I would say probably a dozen concierge home detoxes a year.
Okay.
It's not the majority of what we do, but yeah, those are a few of the things that we do.
Cool. How did you get into this field?
I'd say like most people, most likely. I had my own journey, I would say, that started at the age of 15, or at least it became, I'd say, a glaring issue at the age of 15. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, and was a, pretty athletic kid that, I would say, for whatever reason, had a more rebellious, curious nature. And as a result of that, I would say went down some paths that led me to the use of substances. And at the time, I don't think that when you're 13 or 14 years old that you're thinking smoking a joint at your brother's, your friend's brother's who's in college, that's home for the weekend, is going to lead you to sticking needles in your arms 4 years later. But that was the path for me. And so at the age of 15, I had already started using heroin. And when I started, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I knew it wasn't good. Um, I didn't imagine that the next 10 years of my life would be spent in and out of courtrooms and treatment centers and airplanes and all that came with that lifestyle. But, eventually when I finally turned my life around, I was in a position where at the time hadn't completed any formal education. I'd completed some credits in college, but didn't complete. And I had for a very long time, and it took time to get there, but I would imagine you guys could relate to this. The more you go down the path of struggle, and in my case, I would say a lot of it was heavily based around addiction. You start to develop an identity and the way that you see yourself. And for me, that was something that I would say, as much as the drugs impacted my life, the identity that I developed over time as a result of doing the things that you once thought you would never do, that I certainly wasn't raised to do or believe in. And then you have society, and you get really the legal system. For me, I spent a lot of time, I was in a lot of trouble because of the behaviors that were associated with me. I would say trying to survive and feed a pretty significant heroin addiction. And so when I finally got my life together and realized that, even though in the past my story was I'm Ryan with, this amount of felonies and this amount of misdemeanors that sold drugs and whatever else you want to fill in the gaps with, and started to realize that that is a period and a point in time in my life, and that's a part of my story, but it doesn't have to be who I am today. And kind of at a crossroads of like, okay, now I'm clean and sober, which is great. But, when you go to McDonald's and get a job, no one's giving you an award for being clean and sober. Like, I got to get into life and figure out where do I go from here. And for me, I couldn't think of any better way to put what was a really daunting, scary life of uncertainty. Couldn't find a better way to put it to use than to try to help somebody else turn the corner. And that was really the impetus for me. And so at the time, I was in a treatment center in Malibu, California, and had made the rounds throughout the country. But for whatever reason, there I felt like home to me at the time. It was fresh, it was new, I was nobody. Whereas, growing up in Greensboro, like, everyone knows your business, you're somebody, and there you're just like a little ant. And I needed that. I needed to be humbled. And so I started with just like an entry level position at a sober living at about 9 months sober. And then as time went on, I spent, without every little detail, like close to 7 years split between two different residential programs. First one was a primary mental health treatment center in California. And then the next was a dual diagnosis program, same thing. And that was in Malibu. And the last role I had was one that was more of a business development, admissions role, which as a result of that, you get to know a lot of people in the industry, travel the country, tour programs. You start to see how, you hear different people's communication around things and their philosophies. And fortunately or unfortunately, you learn a lot about how insurance applies to people's care and what it looks like, day to day, month to month, over the long term. And you start to see, how often people come back and have to go through these things. And unfortunately, what I saw was that, at least out there, that there wasn't a ton of support for families, and there certainly wasn't a ton of like unbiased support that wasn't attached to any one entity. And I think the reality, and I would imagine this applies to most businesses, at least in my experiences, you lean more towards supporting people that like you have commonality with, that you like, and which is great and makes sense and is helpful at times. But a lot of people making decisions or making referrals are not making decisions necessarily based on, I've been to this place, I've sat down with their clinical director, I've spoken with a past client, I've toured, I stay in touch, I have a sense of like what's going on. And I became very passionate about creating a company that could sort of be the nucleus and the middle ground of all that, and truly try to guide and inform families in a way that they feel they're making confident decisions, and hopefully shorten the road for people that struggle with the issues that the populations that we work with struggle with.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. And we would do our very best to only work with people and places and programs we like, know, and trust. And sometimes we can like and trust, their business development person or somebody there, but we need to really know the program. And I wish I could say that we've never sent somebody to somewhere we haven't actually, or at least I or somebody at New Waters hasn't been, but we really, really do try to make sure that we just really trust the program too. And, I talk about this a lot too, is it's really important to know the good places, but I think it's more important to know the bad places, and they can change. I mean, sometimes places are great and then they have some kind of change or new leadership or get bought or whatever. And then things can change like that on a dime. And so how long have you been back in North Carolina?
It'll be 2 years this October.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you liking the change?
I love the change. Yeah. I mean, it certainly has had, there's challenges that come with being here where, a business has been around now 5 years as of August, and the majority of the time that was in terms of the development of the business was spent out there.
Sure.
And so I personally feel challenged at times in terms of my ability to provide value in the same way that I did for the business, not so much as it pertains to like what I can do with guiding and helping families, but I would say a large majority of the families that we support are still closer to the West Coast than they are the East Coast, just due to the time that I've been here and trying to get out and meet people and bring awareness to who we are and what we do. But I love being back in North Carolina. It's been an interesting, initially it was a very sort of interesting for my mind to have to go through what I went through when I came back, because I had to face a lot of that identity stuff from the past. Because whether it was real or not, it was my own ego, my own insecurities of people remember Ryan as the guy that, was selling drugs and in and out of trouble and used heroin, and wasn't the guy that you wanted to have your kids hang around. And so I had to face that. And that's been a cool thing to go through. And I'd say challenging in certain ways to realize also, like, Ryan, probably people really aren't thinking about you, but don't really care that much. And I got to remember that so that's been I'd say a cool thing to go through and have the opportunity to allow people to get to know me as a different person today.
Yeah. I love what you said earlier about that. The way you were behaving, from 13 until you got sober, about 10 years later or whatever. And that's not what defines you. But then also the sober Ryan is not all that defines you too. And so it's kind of, we don't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. It's all part of who we are. And, it's funny. You also said, when you try to go get a job at McDonald's, nobody's going to give you a job or an award because you're clean and sober. It reminded me of something when I was 4 months sober. I went to go meet with a headhunter who was like a family friend, older guy. He's probably, you know, in his 60s, 70s now, maybe whatever. And he's sitting there, he's looking at my resume and he's like, oh, this is, yeah, okay, this is interesting. He's got it held up. And I said, and also I'm 4 months sober. And he peeked over the resume and he said, okay, do you have that under control? You know, and it was a great way for me to learn the importance of anonymity and personal anonymity. And also that, like, most people don't really care. They're not going to give me an award. And what I guess I thought was going to happen, he was going to say, oh my God, you're 4 months sober. Let me give you this other job that I reserve for people who have 4 entire months of sobriety. But, you know, and another way to look at it too is a lot of people just don't understand. Like, people who are close to us, obviously people who work in our field, know what living that way and then changing, you know, all we had to do is change everything. And now living the way we live now it's a miracle and it's a gift and it's the greatest thing ever. But most people just don't know. And to try to assume that somebody is going to understand and furthermore think we're these, you know, we should be put on Mount Rushmore for getting sober needs to be squashed as well.
Yeah, for sure, man. But I think, you know, I think that swings both ways. I think, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about like stigma and stuff like that. So maybe not everybody's feeling that way in early sobriety. They're still wrestling with the fact of, you know, who I am and what I've done and all that kind of stuff. But I agree with you. I think there's a large portion of people that do in early sobriety. They think there should be some kind of, you know,
parade in our honor.
Right. That's just not the case, right? We should our own parade, and that's the only one, right? Ryan, you talked about, you know, visiting treatment centers, and we talked about, you know, the good ones and knowing the bad ones and stuff like that. I'm curious, as you do that, what kind of things do you look at? What are you looking at when you're trying to determine if a place is a quality program?
Well, I'll first say, and it wasn't my intent to necessarily say good or bad.
Sure.
It's more so a matter of we truly believe that every place has its own strengths, and some places strengths are different than others, and it's not so much about good or bad. Unfortunately, you know, you guys, I'm sure, have experienced. You've been around long enough, you get to know people enough. You kind of get led to the places that you'd like to believe and most likely are good. They're well intended. They're doing what they can. They're continuing to try to develop their staff. They're thoughtful and doing what they can to be considerate of like the long term and the reality that families, unfortunately, will likely make more than one stop along the way dealing with this stuff. But to answer your question specifically, you know, there would be things like the quality and the background and the history of staff that work there. How did they get there? Where did they come from? Where did they work previously? You know, philosophical views around recovery or mental health or medications. How do they handle crisis situations? How do they handle situations where somebody brings in substances? How do you deal with clients that are particularly challenging, which in our eyes is par for the course doing what we do? And we have, unfortunately, you know, I've had experiences where I get a call on a Friday night at 5:00 from somebody at a program that I've never really spoken to. I know the owner, and I've known the owner for years. They don't call me. The person I don't know calls me at 5:00. And mind you, this is I think a 20-year-old or 19-year-old girl who's from New York City, who's in California at the time. And they call to tell me that they're having her removed on a Friday evening with very little explanation as to why, other than the fact that they've been challenging and brought a dog to the house and things that weren't okay. But in my mind, I'm like, why are you shocked that you did whatever assessments you did on the front end, which I hope were thorough, and you're aware of her history and how challenging this girl has been in the past. But then to kind of call us on a Friday night and let us know and drop that on us when you know it's not easy to get somebody in somewhere over the weekend.
Yeah.
And so things like that, I've become curious about, like, how do you handle those moments? What does the collaboration look like? Whereas in my mind, what would have made a lot more sense would have been to say, hey, we're on the brink of putting this person out of our program. They've been an extreme disruption to our milieu. They don't fit in here well. They need more supervision, accountability. We're willing to give them one opportunity. Can we all sit down tomorrow?
Right.
And have a conversation with them and bring the family in and make them aware, as opposed to they're out of here. There's no really discussion around it. And then we kind of look like, at least I feel this way. I feel a lot of pressure and responsibility to make sure that the families that choose to employ us have good experiences.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like the asshole, like I should have known better. And so, milieu size, I'll go back to the specifics of your question. Like there's a lot of things that, depending on the person, that need to be taken into consideration. Can you have private rooms? What's the cost of a private room? Is it all shared rooms? What's the community like? What's the alumni program like? What's the aftercare program like? Do you have an alumni program? What type of stuff do you guys do on the weekends? What does the schedule look like? Is it, heavily AA based? Is it not AA based? Is it more a behavioral modification program, or is it more, like the last place I went, where their motto is connection, not control? Like every place kind of has their own ways. Whereas, a place you and I recently were trying to get someone to is very much so like limited. Things are taken from you, and there's a time and a place for that person. So to go back to like the initial comment I made about it's not good or bad, it's more about just doing the best that we can to really be informed around what is this program about, what do they stand by, how do they solve problems, who are their staff, and then you can get more into the weeds as far as, some people go shop at Walmart, some people like to go to Gucci, and
Right.
We need to know the places for people that I'll just say are heavily dependent on insurance. And some people, they want the private trainer 3 times a week. They want chef prepared meals every single day. And they want to be able to have their car. And again, a 50-year-old CEO would probably make more sense for something like that versus a 18-year-old kid who's very defiant. And so it really is just about, again, being familiar and resourced well, so that when families call, we feel like we can guide them towards some options and help them make informed decisions. So we don't ever say, hey, this is the place for B. What we'll do is it's going to take probably at least a week. We're going to interview B if he's willing. We're going to interview mom. We're going to interview dad if there's a therapist, a psychiatrist, an attorney, a brother, a sister, a friend, and really try to figure out who is B. What is his past? How did he get here? What kind of things did he play sports? Does he skateboard? Is he a musician? And then take all that stuff into consideration in conjunction with what type of financial abilities does this family have, and then look at trying to come up with a plan for them for at least the next year.
So you try to get a year mapped out?
Ideally, yeah. Unless it's a circumstance where somebody calls us simply for a transport or something, we're kind of staying out of the way of that. We're, hey, we need to get you from Tucson to Raleigh, or we need to get whatever. It just depends. But if someone brings us in under the guise of, we want you to help us manage care, we want you to help us with placement, or we want you to help us with an intervention, and we're on the front end of that, yeah, we're doing all the interviews. We provide the family with a document that usually we'll have at least 3 recommendations, reasons as to why we think those are good recommendations, costs associated with the programs, contacts, how insurance applies to their program. And then we provide them with a list of questions, and we say, we want you to get on the phone with these places, call them. Here's some questions to start off with. And then they'll come back to us, and we'll try to narrow it down to 2. And then we'll bring B into the equation, sit down with B and say, hey, we're your family's concerned, and this is why we're here. Ultimately, we want to see you have a life, and We've taken some time to really try to get to know you and your family, and we feel like we've come up with a list of some good resources that, hopefully you will feel like they resonate with you and you can buy into, and go from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge service because, as we know, and I mean, we run into it all the time, is that, it's a family, loved ones in crisis. And then times that we live in, the first thing they do is Google, treatment in my area or treatment, in California, whatever it is. And, that really is just going to get the results for who's, spending the most money in SEO. It's not going to get you necessarily the most quality or best fitting treatment center for that particular individual. So, I mean, I think what you guys are doing is great. And, I think there's a huge need for that service so that we can work to get people plugged into places that are going to make a big difference for them.
I think so. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've seen you work with people, and you do an amazing job. And, the family thing, I'm certainly have no certifications, qualifications, but I talk to them all the time. And the only thing I know is that it's not for me to say what these boundaries are, but once they're created, they all got to stick to them. If one person folds or gives a little, then it's kind of over. Is that pretty accurate? Have I been giving people the wrong information?
I wouldn't say it's over. It just,
for the moment,
likely prolongs potentially getting to where we were hoping to go.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're forced to pivot. And at times it can lead in a direction that maybe wasn't the preferred path, but not necessarily over. Yeah. But that's always kind of the what you're trying to avoid in that initial onboarding of a family for us is making it very clear that we're not here to decide what those boundaries are for you, but whatever you decide, everyone needs to be on the same page with, and you need to be prepared to follow through with those things. I'd rather you not have them than say, this is what we're planning to do and not do it, because that's likely what's been happening for, however long things have been going on before you came to us. And, I'll share some of my story, which I share with families, is from 15 to 25, God knows how many times I went to detox, or how many days or I had to sit in jail or sit in treatment or a courtroom, and more than anything, watch and hear and experience the despair that my family experienced, my mom and my dad and my sister. But one thing I always remember is what my dad would say a lot of times is, this is the last time, Ryan. It's the last time I'm doing this. You can figure it out. And it was never really the last time.
Yeah.
And so when you're that, especially that young, I don't know how much age applies or matters in this set of kind of like this thought process, but I knew it wasn't the last time. And when I knew it was the last time is when I showed up to the house and my key didn't work. So it almost seemed like it would have been better if he had had somebody to really help him, which that's the hardest thing to do in my experience as a parent, and just working with families, and also trying to encourage families to make some of those hard decisions where, I have a kid, recently born, but I don't have young adults that I'm having to say, hey, you can't come in the house, take a bag and figure it out.
Yeah.
Now I've been the guy on the other end encouraging the family that that's likely what needs to occur in order for them to get to a place where they finally realize this isn't okay anymore. And these are choices that you're making. And this is what our support looks like in the event you choose to make different choices. But allowing that person to begin to actually experience the consequences of their choices in the event that their family was not there to continue to prop them up in a way that lifestyle can continue to persist.
It's a powerful metaphor. If it's even a metaphor, I mean, it actually happened, but just literally change the locks on you. We're done.
Yeah.
Cause I experienced the same thing. My parents were great, but I was very manipulative. Can you imagine that? And and I'd never heard it said like that, but they would say this, all right, B, this is the last time. It is, but usually, I need rent, I need whatever, but whatever it was, some form of actually bailing me out of jail or actually bailing me out of some financial crisis. But I think I always knew that it wasn't the last time, like I knew and no blame. I mean, I was the one acting like this and manipulating everybody, but I think that I kind of always knew that they would keep bailing me out. And fortunately, it's funny when I went to treatment, my mother drove me to treatment at 41 years old. It wasn't my idea, but she's the one who took me. And we got there and I was going through the intake process and they said what it was going to cost. And I looked at her and she said, get your checkbook. And I wrote a check for my member responsibility. I used insurance, but it was still probably the biggest check I'd ever written in my life at the time. And I don't know if I'd be sober now if she hadn't said those words to me. It wasn't quite as stern as the locks being changed, but I've been away from living from home since, for 20 something years at that point. So, but yeah, I mean I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't thought about that in a while. And that was very powerful. Like this, okay, it's done. Like now you take care of yourself now.
And I think, there's a lot of contingencies. There's a lot of things that could potentially happen. I think, and I'm sure you deal with this a lot, but when you're working with that family that is struggling to set boundaries or to, be consistent with holding those boundaries, there's a lot of things that I think they're fearful of, right? And one is that, they're going to spend the night in jail and that's going to be uncomfortable and I don't want them to go through that or, other things like that. But I think the ultimate fear there is that if I do this thing, then they're going to die. I mean, that's like the big one, right?
Oh yeah.
Especially when we're talking about, I'm going to lock the doors or I'm not going to provide funds for them to be able to, have a roof over their head or God knows what, right? As that if I really hold true to this boundary and then my child or my loved one loses their life, how am I going to live with that guilt? How am I going to live with the loss of this person that I love so dearly? And that's tough. That's tough. I think especially as a professional that's, as you were mentioning, that, sometimes we're trying to guide families through this process. And that's a touchy one, right? Because I think we are all very well aware of the potential, the finality of some of the consequences that come from struggling with addiction. So that's a big one. And I bring that up just because, as you mentioned, I have kids myself. They're approaching adolescence, but we're not quite there yet. And so I haven't lived that myself, but I've worked with, tons of families that are struggling with that exact same thing. And we've also seen the product of that not holding those boundaries, I think sometimes contributes to the finality of that condition, sometimes just as much as maybe setting the boundaries, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's difficult. That's I would say the challenge of working in the space that we work in is there are so many variables and there is no clear-cut answer that has a guarantees. It's not A plus B equals C.
Right.
It's a very, very fluid set of ongoing circumstances, changes, characters that you're dealing with. And so that was really, I'd say, like a big part of why I wanted to create the type of company that we have, is because we are aware of that.
Yeah.
And having somebody that, at least in our eyes, that it was consistent with that family, it allows an opportunity to really get to know everybody in a way that is challenging when you go from, I'll just use some local places. You go from Triangle Springs to Red Oak, from Red Oak to name whatever sober living. And everyone kind of gets to know that person and that family a little bit for the time that they have with them, and they transition somewhere else. Yeah. And depending on where that person is and where the family is, people can go astray, or they pick up different things along the way, or they get different messages. And before you know it, everybody's kind of split up or on different pages, or something gets missed or isn't shared with the place that the person steps down with, that we are hopefully doing a good enough job that all of that information is really making it to everybody in order to try to avoid some of the just bouncing around and keeping everybody, I would say, like on their North Star. I don't know a better way to put it, but I do believe that there's a lot of value in having somebody that gets to know you, that remains consistent throughout the journey, because usually you're making a few stops along the way.
I agree. And part of the value you would add there too is, we see this, somebody comes to New Waters, they bring, mom brings son, let's say he's 20, and he, after 3 days, he's never been to treatment. He thinks he's better. And I always try to tell the loved ones on the front end, he's going to look better. He's going to sound better. He's going to be speaking a new language. He's going to feel better, but he's so not even close to being better. And then like with every stage, that's just, detox, and then residential, and then, IOP with housing. But at every stage, just to kind of be there to keep, you've seen this person from before he went to treatment all the way through every level of care, but always be that reminder of like, this is a process. This is a lifelong thing. Yeah. Instead of just, because along the way, the longer somebody is in a continuum of care, it's easier to convince the family that they're fine now, but with having you shepherding the whole thing, just to always remind people that this is just an ongoing thing. I mean, I heard a lady one time, one of her sons had died from overdose, and she was, her younger son was starting to go through it. He was probably in his early 20s, and the other son had died a few years before, and she was trying to get him to go to treatment, but she was not sticking to anything that she, wouldn't take suggestions. And I just remember she said, "I'm going to love him right into the grave." And she wasn't joking, but it was more of an expression. I just said, let's say that again. Just think about what you're saying. And that's kind of to your point about, and to yours too, just about the families that are afraid to let the son stay in jail for a night or a weekend because they're worried what will happen to him. Is this decision, this sticking to a boundary, going to kill my loved one? But what the alternative is this enabling is probably more likely to aid and abet that,
It's tough to know where to draw the line.
Yeah.
It can go either way, and that's the reality of the situation. And I would say there's generally a kind of a put on reserve to put somebody on. It's not like I'm excited to encourage that, but if you have enough history and evidence to say, hey, we've been doing it this way,
right,
maybe it's worth trying something different. And our model is that the family has somebody that's available to them pretty much 24/7. They're expected to meet once a week, and these people are, in our case, people that happen to have had kids that have gone through some of these things as well. And so the hope is that the families feel as supported as possible as they make some of these, at times, what feels like mean or very difficult decisions, and trying to help them gain a different perspective around some of those things, as opposed to, I'm never doing this, that's just terrible. And sometimes that's just what it is, and you have to work with what you got. And it doesn't mean that things can't still go well without somebody doing that either. But there are certainly occasions where I will personally, whether I'm pushing it or not, it might be my opinion that would be a decision that I would prefer us to make and try out. And, like the comment you made of I'm going to literally love them to the grave. I would say you're going to love the person to death. Same kind of thing, like literally.
Yeah.
And the same way that they do whatever they do up in their second story bedroom in your house, probably not going to be much different than what they do on the street. They're likely going to call the same people.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to try to get the same things. Now, they may not have the resources or the comfort of your home to do it in. Just because they're suddenly without your house and shelter doesn't mean that the likelihood of fatality is less or more. I think that there's this illusion or idea of like this sense of security. Well, if I'm here, then at least I know. But people sadly pass away in their homes or in their cars all day, every day, the same way that people do on the streets.
It's very true. It's very true. And like you mentioned, there's never, there's in most cases, there's not a clear-cut answer, right? It's just like you said, we have to have all the information. The family has to have all the information. We have to weigh the options. We have to take an honest look, like you said, and like what's working, what's not working. What if we tried? What are the available options? And then make an educated guess or educated decision based on what we feel like is going to be most helpful. And that's really all you can do. You know what I mean? But I think the added value is having somebody like yourself, or, if we're on the phone with a family at New Waters or something like that, is that for them, this may be the first time they've dealt with this. At least for us, like we're coming into the situation with experience, right? We've seen these situations. We know what's likely to work in these situations, and we can provide some guidance that hopefully could be helpful in these situations, right?
Absolutely.
It sounds like this will be a good thing to end on too, is just that in so many of these cases, just that definition of insanity that we all hear in recovery, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
That's right.
Takes what it takes.
It takes what it takes.
Some people it takes longer than others.
Yeah. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we're how do we find you?
How do you find me? Spearheadhealth.com is our website.
Okay.
I'd say that's the best place to find us for information. And there's contact information on the website, phone number, email. That'd be the best course of action.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Ryan Gartrell, for being here today. And everybody check out that website, and we will see you soon out there in the field.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, appreciate you guys.